The year was 1945, and the world was on the cusp of a discovery that could change the course of history. Or so we thought. A British expedition was launched under the command of Sir John Franklin, with the goal of finding the elusive Northwest Passage through the Arctic. This narrow route was believed to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, bypassing the perilous and lengthy route around the southern tip of South America. For centuries, explorers had attempted to find this fabled passage, only to vanish into the vast, uncharted ice fields of the North. We were determined to succeed where all others had failed. As a young officer aboard one of the ships, Resolute, I was filled with anticipation and excitement. My crew was composed of capable men, many of whom had sailed across the globe. The ship itself was a marvel of design, built for strength and endurance in the harshest conditions. We were set to make history, we told ourselves. The early days of the journey were filled with camaraderie. As we sailed northward from England, the cool breeze of the open sea filled our lungs, and the promise of the unknown stretched out before us. We navigated the cold waters of the North Atlantic and approached the ice floes of the Arctic Circle. Our ship seemed to glide effortlessly through the waters as icebergs grew larger on the horizon, looming like ancient monoliths, their jagged forms cutting into the sky. In the beginning, we laughed and joked. The uncertainty of what lay ahead only made the adventure that much more thrilling. But the closer we came to the ice, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, colder. The ship creaked with the sounds of ice pressing against its hull, and there were moments when the ice floes surrounded us entirely. The Resolute would shudder, grinding against the frozen mass beneath, as the sound of ice scraping across the ship echoed like an ominous warning. It didn't take long before the crew began to notice strange occurrences. A figure on the horizon, seen only in the corner of one's eye. The shadows shifting in the ice, moving when no one was watching. None of us spoke of it at first, dismissing it as the result of the oppressive cold, or perhaps the trickery of the mist that frequently engulfed the ship. But even then, something deep in my chest told me that these were no mere tricks. One of the crew members, young Ellis, had the first real encounter. He was on the deck late one night when he swore he saw a figure standing at the edge of the ice. He described it as tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. When he shouted for the others, the figure had vanished. We all laughed at his account. "Must have been the cold playing tricks on your eyes, Ellis," Lieutenant Calloway had said, chuckling. But Ellis's face was pale, and his hands trembled as he recounted the encounter. The tension started to grow, the undercurrent of unease settling like ice water in our veins. No one spoke of it aloud, but we all began to sense it, the feeling of being watched. Then the first disappearance occurred. Lieutenant Calloway had ventured off the ship on a routine scouting mission to gather ice samples and examine the surroundings for potential dangers. He had been gone longer than expected, and when he didn't return by nightfall, we assumed he had simply gotten lost in the fog. The following day, we sent out a search party. Hours passed with no sign of him. We ventured deeper into the ice, shouting his name, but the fog swallowed it whole. The silence was deafening. It was then that we discovered something strange. His belongings. His gloves, boots, and his coat were left behind on the deck as though he had abandoned them willingly, But the icy wasteland outside was not a place to abandon one's gear. No one would make such a foolish mistake. Yet the mystery of Calloway's disappearance only deepened. The captain was uncharacteristically quiet when we reported our findings. No explanations, no plans, just a quiet, haunted look in his eyes. I could feel the fear creeping through the men like a slow-burning fever. We continued our search for Calloway, but when we returned to the ship that night, I saw the faces of the crew. They were pale, their eyes wide. There was no talk of food or progress or the beautiful land we hoped to chart, only whispers and fear. Days passed with little progress. The fog grew denser, heavier, swallowing the Resolute in its thick, soupy embrace. We were trapped. The sea had frozen, trapping us in place. Every day felt the same, gray, cold, and stagnant. The ice pressed against the ship like a vice, making even the slightest movement impossible. There were no sightings of other ships, no friendly shores on the horizon. The world around us had become a frozen wasteland, vast and unforgiving. In the midst of this isolation, the disappearance of Lieutenant Calloway began to weigh heavily on the men. Some began to talk in hushed tones, whispering of strange shapes they had seen in the fog, of creatures moving just beyond their sight. The men joked nervously, trying to keep their spirits high, but the laughter had a hollow sound to it. Then it happened again. Corporal Thatcher, a large and boisterous man who had been one of the more vocal skeptics of the supernatural rumors, went missing during a routine scouting trip. At first, we believed it was another case of a man getting lost in the fog. But when he failed to return by nightfall, concern began to spread. A search party was sent out immediately, and I was part of it. But what we found that day was far beyond anything we could have imagined. We found his body, or rather, what was left of it. Thatcher's body had been torn apart. His clothing was shredded as if by something with claws too sharp to be human. His limbs had been twisted into unnatural positions, and his face was the worst part. His eyes were wide with terror, frozen in place, as though he had seen something so awful, so incomprehensible, that it had broken his mind. The other men refused to go near the body. They would not look at it, and they could hardly speak. The captain ordered it to be brought back to the ship for proper burial, but no one could bring themselves to touch the body. It was as though it had been marked by something far worse than death. The search continued for days, but no trace of Thatcher's killer was found. The icy tundra stretched out endlessly before us, and it seemed as though the fog was swallowing the world whole. The air grew colder still, the wind sharper, biting at our exposed skin like needles. That night, I stood on the deck, staring out into the mist. I could feel it. Something was out there, just beyond the veil of the fog. I could hear the subtle scraping of ice against ice, as though the very land was alive, shifting in response to our presence. And then, just before I turned to leave, I saw it. A shape, tall, thin. It moved with an unsettling grace, its form flickering in and out of existence like a shadow too large to belong to any man. My breath caught in my throat. It was gone before I could blink, disappearing into the snow, but the cold feeling remained in the pit of my stomach. I knew then that whatever had taken Thatcher was not of this world, and it was watching us all. The fear among the crew reached a boiling point after Thatcher's death. Whispers of escape, of abandoning the ship, circulated in hushed voices during the long nights. The captain remained distant, his face gaunt and hollow, as if he had aged 10 years in a matter of days. The fog never lifted, and the temperature continued to plummet. But the men could no longer sit idly by. The captain issued an order. We would search for whatever had taken our comrades. We would confront whatever it was that had invaded our minds and stolen our souls. But this decision was born not of strength, but of desperation. The search party was formed, and I, along with 3 others, prepared to venture out into the unforgiving wilderness. The air was thick with the scent of ice, and the fog clung to us, wrapping around our limbs like a suffocating shroud. We armed ourselves with rifles and knives, but deep down, we all knew they would be little help against the creature we had glimpsed in the fog. We moved cautiously, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The sound of our boots crunching in the snow was the only noise to be heard. We trudged on, our breaths clouding in the cold air, our senses alert to every crackling sound, every movement in the distance. Hours passed with no sign of the creature. Then, as we rounded a bend in the ice, I caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a figure, tall and thin, standing motionless against the backdrop of the swirling snow. My heart raced, and I raised my rifle, my hand shaking. It saw us. In an instant, it was moving toward us, faster than any creature had the right to move across the snow. It was on us in seconds, its long arms reaching out with unnerving speed. The first man, Private Roberts, barely had time to react before he was yanked from our midst, his scream lost in the roar of the wind. We fired our weapons, but it was like shooting at smoke. The creature didn't flinch. It simply moved faster, each stride taking it further out of reach. We had no choice but to flee, scrambling over the ice, desperate to escape. The creature was relentless. I could feel its presence behind us, growing closer, the air growing colder, as if it were feeding on our fear. We made it back to the Resolute by sheer luck, but not unscathed. Our numbers had dwindled. Private Roberts was lost, and with him, any hope that we could defeat whatever we were facing. I stood on the deck of the Resolute, watching the fog swirl in the distance. The cold had settled deep into my bones, and the air was so still that it felt as though the world had stopped moving entirely. We had lost so much, but we had not given up. But I knew, whatever it was still out there, waiting, and it was not finished with us. I looked out over the icy sea, trying to push the images of the creature from my mind, but it was impossible. I could feel it, the hunger in the wind, the darkness beneath the ice. We had awakened something ancient, something that should never have been disturbed. I had no illusions about our survival. The crew was broken. There was no hope of rescue, no chance of escape. Whatever we had disturbed was going to finish what it had started. And then, through the fog, I saw her. Tall, thin, and impossibly graceful. The huntress. She was watching me. I took a deep breath, knowing I was the last one left. Whatever had been beneath the ice, whatever had taken my men, it was coming for me, and there would be no escape.